On this episode of Newt's World, I want to share with you the conversation I had recently on Triggered with Don Jr., his podcast, which is terrific.
Joining me now, former Speaker of the House, author of March to the Majority, the one and only Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, and it's great to be with you, and it's amazing how much ground you cover.
Well, the reality is this. I think, Andrew Breitbart said it's sort of best. Like, politics is downstream of culture, and I think the Republican Party sort of often scoffed at that. They didn't try to get involved. They didn't try to do these things. They allowed the left to sort of pervasively take over education and pop culture and sports and even the upper echelon of law enforcement and the military. And we just sort of sat back there and were like, we're going to stand. Like, we had to get involved. And I think my father is one of the few guys that could actually do that. And, I don't know if you saw what happened, or the NFL. I mean, the NFL perhaps is even, the UFC was different because it was always a conservative group. When you're a guy that gets in a cage to fight another man on your own, like, it's on you. You own that. It's an individual sport. You go in and perform. And I think that sort of aligns with the conservative mindset. The team sports, not as much. But watching the NFL players, score touchdowns or interception and do the Trump dance, multiple times. I mean, the Detroit Lions, you got the LA Raiders, you got the Titans, all guys doing it. That was amazing to see, because now, for the first time in a long time, it's okay to be America first. That was like the permission slip for so many more people. So I imagine this is just the start. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that the election really mattered. When you talk to people and you think, what if Kamala had won? Oh, yeah. This country would have been down the tubes. And second, I think that your father's sheer courage, 9 solid years of campaigning, being shot, having lawsuits, being impeached, all that courage, just taking it and keeping on coming, has had an effect on a wide range of people. I just did a newsletter at Gingrich 360 about, which was inspired by you, by the way. I thought yesterday you holding the McDonald's French fries box on the airplane, it just suddenly all clicked for me that what you have with Trump is a different kind of cultural divide. It's a cultural divide of people who like sports, people who like winning. Remember, the big problem for liberals is, if you're really into sports, you want performance, you want merit, you want to be able to win, you understand the difference between winning and losing. Now, you go to a place like Georgetown University, where they, when your dad won, they had special rooms people could go to where they could have warm milk and cookies, and they could have a blanket, and they could feel sorry for themselves. Well, that is the opposite of competitive sports.
Yeah.
And that's why I think there's a huge difference. I made a point that when Kamala Harris went on Saturday Night Live, she had 5.6 million views. Yep. But because the Trump campaign came in so fast, NBC decided they had to give him equal time. And the equal time they gave him was Sunday Night Football, which has 20 million views. So he got 4 times as many people as the person they were trying to help. And by the way, the people he was getting are the people likely to vote for him. And I think it's a pretty simple formula. And I think we're right at the edge of a dramatic break with what has been a very long period of left-wing values and left-wing ideas. And I think your point earlier, which some people may think is trivial, but it's not. If you actually go back, for example, to women playing in women's sports, that's a big break from where the left was trying to take us. And if you actually go back to the idea that America should be very careful and not just throw money around the planet. I don't know if you saw the picture today, which is a total embarrassment of President Biden in the back row, while the president of China and the president of India are in the front row at this meeting in Peru. I mean, you couldn't get a more vivid example of how far the Biden-Harris team has undermined America in the world. And as you know, when they have the next meeting, and President Trump is there, he ain't going to be back in the back.
Yeah, I have a feeling that's never going to happen. But it goes to show you, I mean, and I talk about it all the time, and I think people don't realize it. Like when America's not leading, when we exude weakness, the rest of the world sees it. They're going to capitalize on it. I mean, for China, for everyone, for all of our enemies especially, but for even some of those emerging economies, if America is weak, they're going to pounce, or they're going to take advantage of it. And they have taken advantage of these last 4 years. I mean, I can't imagine a place where G7 countries and America's in the back row. That's insane. That's absolutely absurd. And yet it's happening before our very eyes. Everything that we've been talking about, and you and I have spoken about this a bunch. Everything that we've been talking about, it isn't hyperbole. It isn't like it's 100% right, and it's happening before our very eyes. This today was a great example of it.
But it's very interesting the speed with which President Trump is making an impact. You already have the president of Ukraine saying publicly that they will get to peace faster with President Trump than they ever would have with President Biden. Now, that is such a dramatic swing in 2 or 3 weeks' time. And I'm sensing it from friends all around the world, that all of a sudden they're beginning to realize, America's back. America's going to lead. America's going to be strong again. And I think the Trump presidency is going to be a presidency of work and achievement and success and prosperity. And that all leads people to decide around the world they'd rather be with us than against us. So I think this is a very historic moment that we're all in the middle of.
Yeah, I thought it was a really big deal. Obviously you saw, Qatar says Hamas is no longer welcome to safe haven here. Get the hell out. You saw that, what Putin said. Xi said, we want to normalize relations. Magically, all of a sudden they want to do that. I mean, we're winning before we've even taken office. But I think for me and for the people that I talk to, what I've noticed in the last 2 weeks since the election was, I went to, local restaurant here and I'm sitting down and the owner literally comes up to me. He's like, thank you guys so much. We are now going to start an expansion. I go, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, we were talking about it, but we didn't think we'd be able to afford it. Now we're going to take that chance because we think we have the opportunity to actually succeed. It won't just be pulled out from under us. Like, people are going to take those risks that there's going to be something there for them. I mean, to me, that's the ultimate. When I see that, it's happened twice, actually. Hey, we're expanding. We're opening up another place. We're going to do this. And we were literally waiting for November 5th, the outcome of the election, to decide whether we were just going to cower in the trenches and just try to fight off the insanity, or whether we're going to build. Before my father even took office, they're like, hey, we now know we have a chance to succeed, so we're just going for it. I mean, that's about as America as it gets.
Yeah, and Calista and I both had the experience of people who come up to us who felt like they were leaning over the abyss.
Yeah.
That if Kamala had won, they couldn't imagine the America that would have existed. And the level of emotion that we have been experiencing for the last week, the number of people who come up to us who we've never met before, but they've seen us on TV, they know we've been actively supportive of President Trump. Mm-hmm. There's just this very deep emotional feeling that America has been saved and now has a chance to go out and create the kind of economy, the kind of prosperity, the kind of safety. That's what America should be all about. And I do think Jack Kemp used to have this great line when they say, well, how fast will supply side economics work? He said, well, if you drop $20 on the sidewalk, how long does it take somebody to pick it up? Because people respond. I think what you're going to see start to happen both in the U.S. and around the world is you have people looking up going, well, if President Trump's going to be back, now that's a different story. Yeah. And that both means that we're going to have more friends, we're going to have enemies who are much more cautious, and you're going to see entrepreneurs all over the planet. I mean, the Elon Musks of the world, and there are a bunch of them, are going to suddenly say, the place I'd like to invest is the United States. And that's going to mean, I think, a generation of prosperity that's going to run on for a very long time.
Listen, I think you're 100% right with that. Now, I will say, my father can't do it alone, right? He's going to need help from the House, where we have a slim majority. He's going to need help from the Senate, getting some of the people who can actually effectuate that kind of change into his cabinet. So you literally wrote the book, March to the Majority. You did this yourself. The only reason we have a Senate majority is because good candidates, but the incoming freshman class, good candidates, I think they'll be great. But a lot of the guys that have been there for a long time, may not get that message. Can you talk about the governing principles for Congress moving forward. What's your message to the Republican leadership on Capitol Hill? Because, maybe you'll be a little bit more, gentle than mine.
Well, no. Look, when I was Speaker, we had the only 4 balanced budgets since the 1930s. Mm-hmm. We got welfare reform with a Democratic president, and we split the Democrats, 101 in favor, 101 against. And the reason's simple. I studied basically 3 people, Abraham Lincoln, Ronald Reagan, and Margaret Thatcher. And there's a very steady pattern there. The key is to focus on the American people. Mm-hmm. If the American, and I'll tell you, the first huge test is going to be the tax bill. If the American people decide that their future, their family, their budget demands that bill pass, you're going to see a bunch of Democrats, not just Republicans, a bunch of Democrats vote yes. I participated in 81 with Reagan when we passed that 3-year tax cut, the biggest ever done up till then. Mm-hmm. We carried 1/3 of the Democrats. Why? Because they'd go back home and a small businessman would walk up to them and say, you got to pass it. A local housewife would say, you got to pass it. And they got the message that there are these 2 futures. I get to vote yes and come back. I get to vote no and I'm going to get defeated. Mm-hmm. And I think the key for your father is going to be to triangulate where he reaches the American people. Reagan's phrase for it was, he said, I turn up the light for the American people, then they turn up the heat on Congress. And you'll be surprised over a matter of 6 or 8 weeks how many people who are never going to be for you suddenly go, well, I think with a little change here, a little change there. And then they get to the point where they say, I was really always with you. And I think that's the key. And I think the first huge test is going to be the tax cuts because they're the heart between deregulation and tax cuts. It's the heart of the Trump program for relaunching the American economy. If we get that passed early enough in 25, we're going to have a chance to really win in 26 in a way which will resemble President Roosevelt back in 1934. And that's vital. We cannot lose the House in 2026.
So, talk a little bit. I mean, I don't think the Republicans did us any sort of favors extending some of the CR stuff into next year rather than letting it be on Biden. What do you do about that? Because it sort of feels like that's a problem of the past that they're trying to stick with us, like Mitch McConnell in the Senate trying to fund Zelensky for 2 more years so that we can't possibly do anything, maybe I don't limit the purse strings a little bit to get him to the table, while the graft is rich on there. It feels like Republicans did a little bit themselves in allowing that to go on so long that hamstrings my father's ability to do some of the things that he needs to do. What are your thoughts on that? How do you handle that aspect of it? Because I think that's a problem as well.
Look, remember, unless it's in the Constitution, anything which Congress has passed and the president has signed can be repealed by the Congress passing it and the president signing it. So I would go through those things step by step. And in January, February, and March, whether I did it with a series of targeted bills or I did it with one big bill, I just go back through it. And I'll tell you, I've been talking recently with people who are going to put together the entire program for cutting spending. I am convinced that Vivek and Elon are going to come back very early with some proposals. And now you get to the American people. Gallup has reported that the average American believes 50% of all federal spending is waste. So you want to set up a series of votes and say, basically taunt them. Yeah. You want to be the pro-waste senator? You want to be the pro-waste House member? Yeah. And
by the way, the numbers that are out there, it's probably more than 50%. When I hear that there's entire buildings, government buildings, where no one shows up to work, they're working from home anymore. I'd like to find out how many federal employees that have full-time jobs at the federal government that no longer show up to work are working from home. I wonder how many of them are making extracurricular income. Maybe just saying, hey, you got to show up to the office 5 days a week. You can't just do it from home while walking your dog. I think you could probably get rid of half of the government just by making them actually do their damn job.
Look, I think I've said for years, there's a very simple test. Every time there's a big snowstorm, they announce in Washington that only essential personnel need to show up.
Yeah.
Now, I would say you take a list of the people who show up and say, okay, you must be essential. That means everybody who didn't show up is not essential. That should be a hint. So you start there. But it's going to be much deeper than that. If you look at the decision that was made by the Supreme Court that said that bureaucracies can't invent law on their own, and I don't think anybody's done this yet, and it's something
that was Chevron, right?
Yeah. What I'm hoping is that somebody's going to go through and say, given this decision, the following regulations are now no longer valid. Well, if those regulations aren't valid, why do we need the regulators? And you may be able to have literally a block elimination of entire bureaucracies and entire sets of regulations overnight on a scale no one has ever seen before. And that's really the meaning of that Supreme Court decision. It reversed years of turning power over to the bureaucrats and allowing the bureaucrats to make law, even though they're not elected and they don't exist in the Constitution.
Yeah, no, I think there's so much opportunity there. I know, I've been talking to, Vivek and Elon quite religiously, and these guys, they understand it, they get it, they see what's going on, and I think they're going to be incredibly effective. That doesn't mean the swamp doesn't have teeth, but I think these are people that are actually willing to take those slings and arrows along with my father to get it done. And once they expose what's going on, the transparency, once people realize how broken and corrupt it is, that's when you're going to see real change, because the people, when they have the knowledge, are going to lose their minds at how their taxpayer dollars have been wasted.
There's a small group called openthebooks.com, and they actually go and they measure everything. And for example, they find out how many people are being hired under this diversity, equity, and inclusion thing. Mm-hmm. And they list who they are, what their salaries are, what their offices cost. And they really have an immense amount of information on just how much built-in embedded waste there is. And then you look at some of the contracts. Boeing recently was selling literally a coffee pot for the C-17 aircraft at 8,000% more than you could buy it at Walmart.
Yeah.
Now, there's something just profoundly wrong when these kinds of things
it's because they do cost plus contracts. So they get a contract and it's cost plus. So there's no incentive to change anything. They just get a markup over the cost. So there's actually an incentive to have it cost more. And, everyone in the military who, if it's a military thing, no one in the military is going to negotiate that because they want the board seat at Boeing later on. That's their off ramp. So they just allow the waste to continue rather than have there be an incentive to save money or find a better way. There's incentives to have it cost more and take longer. And it's just absolute lunacy. You could never run a company this way. You'd be bankrupt in 2 weeks. But because we keep racking up, an insurmountable amount of debt almost, there's never been that incentive. And that's what needs to change.
That's right. And frankly, remember, when you talk about things like defense, we're talking about life and death. Yep. We're talking about whether or not we can keep up with China and whether or not we can cope with all the different kind of dictatorships around the world. This is not just some pork barrel game where the lobbyists get to make money and the corporations get to make money. Every time we have waste in the Pentagon, we are weakening America, and we are risking losing a future war. And I think that's a big, big decision.
Well, the Pentagon also failed its 7th audit. It's in a row. These are the people, they hired 86,000 new armed IRS agents to go after people. They say it's about billionaires, but honestly, there's not 1,000 billionaires probably in the world. You don't need 86,000 armed agents to go after them. They're going after people who spent $601 on their Venmo because that's the break line. But how do these people talk about these things and try to manage them if they're incapable of doing it themselves? I mean, this is dark money, slush funds. This is weaponized slush funds. I'm sure most of that money went to Ukraine to keep the wars and the endless wars going or elsewhere. But if the Pentagon can't fail an audit, how can they have an IRS that expects everyone else to be above board? I mean, it seems quite hypocritical to me.
Well, one of the nature of big governments everywhere in the world is that the rules never apply to them. I mean, given the way Elon Musk has saved enormous amounts of money at SpaceX and at Tesla and at X, I would not be at all surprised to have him suggest that they bring in all the auditors in the Pentagon and they say, guys, you have this great opportunity. 6 months from now, we will have a completed Pentagon audit, or we're replacing all of you with new people.
Yeah.
And that's the incentive plan. I don't care how many hours a week you have to work. That's your incentive plan. You want to keep your job, get this done now.
Yeah, Elon's the perfect guy. I mean, I spent quite a bit of time with him this weekend and over the last few weeks in the transition meetings, and you hear him talk about, I mean, what he's done with SpaceX privately in a few years. He's got capabilities that NASA, with a 75-year head start and probably an infinite budget, essentially, isn't capable of doing. It's like, I want that guy auditing all of these agencies. Imagine what you could do if you save $1 trillion or $2 trillion in the federal government, where you could put that. We could actually, I don't know, educate our children, or maybe take care of our vets, or have a non-crumbling infrastructure in our country. I mean, that's the difference. Instead, it's going to lobbyists and just being lost and wasted entirely, which is it's an incredible opportunity.
It is, and frankly, if you stick with Elon for just a minute, many years ago, Congressman Bob Walker and I introduced the first bill to create a reusable rocket. Put up $400 million. NASA hired Lockheed. They couldn't get the job done. About 15 years later, Elon comes along and he begins to invent reusable rockets. He reduced the cost of putting a satellite in space by 90%. It's the most deflationary single development in the last 20 years. Now he's packaging all of them together into the Starship, and the Starship is going to have 33 rockets in the first stage, 3 rockets in the second stage. It'll be the largest, most powerful rocket ever built, and my hope is that he's going to stick to a timetable he's announced, and in 2026, we're going to send the first 2 or 3 Starships to Mars carrying cargo to begin the process of setting up the equipment we need ultimately for humans to be able to live and work on that planet.
Yeah.
None of these things would happen without entrepreneurs. And that's the other thing I would say, Don, that so much fits your family. If we can liberate the entrepreneurial spirit of America, if we can get people who are excited to get up 7 days a week and go out and invent and create things, the kind of future we can create for our children and grandchildren is literally unknowable. It's going to be so amazing and such a remarkable chance. And I know that you feel the same. I have grandchildren now. You have children. You want them to have the best future possible. And that means you need entrepreneurs, not bureaucrats, to invent the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a huge part of my focus is creating some of that parallel economy, getting away from the DEI policies of corporate America, creating things that are based on merit and actually efficient and all that. I mean, that's what I've spent when I wasn't campaigning. That's what I've spent my last few years of my life actually doing. Now that I'm done campaigning, I can actually spend a lot more time on that. But it's 100% right, and it's guys like that are going to do it. But you can't. It was funny in talking with Elon. He actually said he was talking about some of the rockets and this. He goes, it took me less time to think of, design, and create the rocket than it did to get the paperwork from the government to launch the rocket. I mean, the permit to launch a rocket that a genius came up with and built and actually made work, the permit took longer. That was the stumbling block in the process. Think about that. You could invent and build a rocket faster than you could get the permit to actually test it. That was the perfect example of how insane, that's something that should basically happen in about 3 seconds, maybe a day or 2, but it shouldn't be a process that takes years and everyone has to chime in and a bunch of paper pushers who are doing nothing, making it impossible for geniuses like Elon to create. I mean, imagine what we've destroyed, that will for people to be that entrepreneurs because of the red tape. And if we can cut that, that's number one for me.
Yeah, I think actually, if you go back and look at the Reagan years, cutting the red tape actually has a bigger economic growth impact than cutting taxes. I think cutting taxes is very important, but you can eliminate a lot of the red tape. And I think because we know more now, and because of the kind of leadership that your dad creates and the kind of people he's attracting, we're going to have a chance to have the greatest deregulatory experience. And that is going to liberate the economy in ways that people will look back 10 or 15 years from now, and they will think it was like a tidal wave of new ideas, new products, new services that raised the income and the quality of life for virtually every American.
Yeah, no, I think it's a once in a lifetime opportunity that we have right now, and it's not just my father. Now you have a team of people surrounding him that are on point, that are on mission, that aren't there to slow roll it. so it can get back to business as usual. And, to me, that's the incredible opportunity, Newt. So there's a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson that goes something to the effect of, to be yourself in a world that's constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. I sort of feel like that sums up perhaps my father's relationship with Washington, as good as it gets. They tried to change him. They tried to make him something that was what they wanted, and it didn't work. What do you think about it?
Well, I wrote a couple of books on your dad when he first came out of nowhere and became president. And what I was struck with as I did the research, all through his career, he's been Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He's been Donald Trump when it was good. He's been Donald Trump when it was bad. And he just kept being Donald Trump. And I think that's in a sense what Emerson's talking about, that you have this inner being. You have to be true to yourself before you can be true to anybody else.
Yeah.
And I think that we've seen a consistency with President Trump, who genuinely loves the country. As you know, you're part of the family. Yep. He doesn't have to do any of this.
No, he had an easy life. He could do whatever he wanted. He could play golf all day. He could do whatever the hell he wanted. He was, it was actually a pretty good life. And I'm like, see, he didn't just go through 4 years of it in the presidency. And then there's 4 years of lawfare and trials, and they're trying to throw him in jail and, fake accusations from decades. I don't think,
and getting shot.
Yeah, shot's kind of a big one. Hard to believe. It's like that.
At one point, a couple of months back when it was really tough,
yeah.
I called and said, this is really difficult. And I'm really proud that you're, sticking to it. And he said to me, for the funny tone, he said, "What choice do I have?" I mean, it wasn't like he said, "Let's create the hardest possible game because I want to test myself." But he was in the process of saving the country. And if that meant you had to risk getting shot, you risk getting shot. If that meant you had to go into a debate where the two moderators would be on the side of your opponent, you went into the debate. I mean, he's, as you know, because you've lived through it more than I have, he has consistently gotten up every morning and thought about saving this country and done what he had to do every day. And I am convinced that for the next 4 years, we're going to get the same service, the same courage, the same dedication, and that he is going to continue to attract absolutely first-class people who are going to collectively create for the American people a real opportunity to have a better future.
Well, listen, like when he got shot, fight. He doesn't stop. I saw him, before election night. I mean, I was with him. I saw him pull 2 all-nighters in a row. He's 78. Like, I was dying. And then, he's getting done with the second all-nighter after being up for 48 hours, and he's going on TV and then doing a whole day of, it's truly spectacular. I mean, it was just amazing to watch. And, I guess a lot of people ask me, well, why do you keep fighting? I was like, well, if I don't, I'm probably going to end up in the gulags next to Elon and a couple of the other people. So I guess we didn't have a choice. But Newt, I'd love you to take us back to I guess it's the 104th Congress in the 90s, following your first 2 years as House Speaker. The Republican majority was reelected in the 1996 election. It's the first time the Republicans had done so in 68 years. What can current Republican leaders learn from your leadership then? I mean, I think you had a stronger majority. You didn't have a majority of 3 or 4, whatever we're going to end up with. They're still counting votes. I mean, 2 weeks later, they're still counting votes in some places because, we're a third world nation, essentially. But what do you think they can learn? What do you think the differences are perhaps between your majority and now? How can they get around that obstacle, et cetera?
Well, look, I think it's really, in a sense, the same advice I would give to all the new members of the incoming Trump administration. First, every time there's a special election, go all out, drown it with resources and personnel, and win it. We did that. We picked up 7 seats the first 2 years we were in office. Second, as I said earlier about Lincoln and Reagan and Thatcher, listen to the American people. The American people want the border controlled. The American people want inflation under control. The American people want economic growth. The American people want more energy and less expensive energy. You can go down a list like that. If we're doing what the American people want and they know it, they're very likely going to give us a chance to serve them again. But it has to be a relationship. I don't talk about communicating to the American people. I talk about working with the American people. And if we would learn to do that, and by the way, one of the things that President Trump has done that is truly heroic, and I've been active for a very long time, in the Republican Party.
Yeah.
He brought in Latinos, African-American males, in fact, also a number of African-American females now. He brought in Asian Americans. He brought in working class whites. I mean, all of a sudden you have a brand new coalition replacing the Roosevelt coalition. And that means Republicans, particularly traditional Republicans, have to learn that they're part of a new, bigger, and different coalition.
Yeah.
And that's for some of them, it's going to be very uncomfortable.
I mean, you were on this early. I mean, even back in 2016, you were talking about the sort of political realignment that was going underway. My father, rewrote that map. What other places do you see that realignment? I definitely saw it. I was saying, maybe not overall numbers, but per capita over the last few months, I was taking more selfies when I'm at like an airport somewhere with African-American men than anywhere else. I saw it. It's palpable. It's not like a one-time thing. It's like I saw a couple more people at a rally. Like, this was where they weren't expecting me, and they'd had enough. They'd seen that. Certainly seen the same thing with Latinos. I especially saw it in some of the younger demographic that would never be Republican, and yet in some states we even won, but certainly on average across the country, getting 15% of the 18 to 29 would have been absolutely unheard of, and yet we did it. I mean, Make America Great Again is actually cool.
Well, I think two big examples. One, we found that an awful lot of suburban women who on the surface would say that abortion was the biggest issue, as they thought through how dangerous the world is. And I watched one of them on a program that I was watching that was interviewing people, and she said, look, when you start worrying about World War III and you start worrying about Russia and China and all these things, suddenly safety becomes the number one issue. And so we saw a much stronger vote among women for President Trump than anybody expected 3 or 4 weeks out. Yeah. And I think it was largely whether the safety was from illegal immigrants, as we've been watching in this terrible trial in Georgia, or the safety is from foreign countries, but a real change in that sense. I think second, what we've learned is that you have younger people who on the surface will tell you that they're green, et cetera, until you ask them, can you afford to buy a house? Can you afford to buy a car? Can you find a job? And all of a sudden, the economy becomes a really big deal. Yeah. If we can be the party that delivers growth, lower costs, greater opportunities, that young people can afford to buy a house, that people in general can afford to live better, that people in the inner city are safer and don't have to fear what the weekend will be like in terms of killings, I think we could be a majority for a very long time.
Yeah, I guess, what does the Democrat do from here on out? I mean, they don't exactly have someone like a Tip O'Neill out there. I'm watching CNN in the days after the election, and I mean, they literally have people that are, I guess in their eyes, credible people saying, screaming like lunatics. Like, I don't care if you can't afford your groceries. We need, drive-through abortions, and we need 3-year-olds to be able to decide without parental consent to get gender-affirming care. I mean, do they learn anything from this? What do they do? Because it doesn't seem like they're learning. I'm sure a couple people will get it, but do they just continue to ostracize this at the levels that's the megaphone?
Look, I think you're going to have a big fight inside their own party. You're going to have the wing that can't learn anything because they're ideologically so fanatically committed to a world that doesn't exist. And then you're going to have a wing that's more rational, more moderate, and they're going to be constantly beaten up and intimidated by the people who are nuts. Yeah. And I use that term deliberately. I think you have to understand when somebody walks up to you and says, I really don't know what a woman is, and I really don't want parents to have any role in their child deciding to change their sex, and I really don't mind if men compete in women's sports and win all of them. You're dealing with people who aren't in very close touch with reality. And then when you hear people say, for example, from the river to the sea, and the truth is, if you went into these college campuses and said, which river?
Yeah. And which sea?
They wouldn't have any clue. They're just chanting mindlessly. It's the decay of American education into sort of a social movement.
Yeah, I saw that during some of those chants. They'd put up a big banner that spray paint, Palestine somewhere, but They misspelled it, not exactly their finest. But Newt, earlier you mentioned Jack Kemp, and he once said, "We want peace with all our hearts, but peace cannot be achieved through weakness." Talk about the global effects of that. I mean, I guess it's sort of that, maybe even a Reagan-esque philosophy of, peace through strength, which I think we've, totally done without. But, having the woke policies in our military, having, the insanity that we've seen there. How do we achieve peace through strength once again?
Well, let me say, first of all, we need a deep and thorough overhaul of both the Pentagon and the intelligence community. I think it's hard to overstate how much they've been weakened, starting with Obama and coming up through Biden. So I think that's a very important reform element for us to have any chance of survival. Mm-hmm. I've always told people that the key to understanding liberals is that they saw The Lion King. They thought that it was a documentary. Yeah. They think that lions and zebras sing and dance together. And when you try to explain to them that in the real world, lions eat zebras, they go, no, didn't you see the movie? And that's how you get people like our current Secretary of State, who wanders around babbling to the Iranians, to Hamas, to Hezbollah, no idea about the real world. They have no idea about the dangers of Venezuelan gangs coming into America. Yeah. They have no idea about the danger of flash mobs looting stores. And so I think you have to recognize that there is built into modern liberalism an inability to deal with the real world. Now, in the real world, I think it's pretty straightforward. Yeah. If you have enemies, you better be stronger than they are. Because if you're stronger than they are, they won't do anything and you will have peace. But if they think you're weak, you will have war and you may be conquered. People should look at footage of Beirut or of Gaza or of Ukraine and understand this could be America. We're not guaranteed that we get to sidestep history. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that will protect us is to be strong. And to be strong, we have to profoundly overhaul the Defense Department, the Homeland Security Department, and the intelligence agencies.
Yeah, I mean, you used the example of the Secretary of State, who's an incompetent. He's one of the adults that was supposedly going to be back in charge, but his actions clearly show that that wasn't the case. But you mentioned the DOD, and you're right. What about General Milley? Calling China, be like, listen, if there's ever anything, I'll let you know before America possibly. I mean, to me, it seems just treasonous. But if it's not treasonous, it's certainly incompetent that you would warn your greatest adversary about anything that you're going to possibly do in the event that something happened in Taiwan. I mean, I can't even imagine that these people could possibly ascend to power, but that's how bad it's gotten. That to become a 3- and 4-star general, you actually have to be a bureaucrat and a politician, not a war fighter, because they've been politicized and those roles are entirely political now, not anything to do with capability or military preparedness.
Yeah, I think you've got to go back to setting standards and setting objectives, promoting people who achieve those standards and those objectives. In the case of Milley, I can't for the life of me understand how he's gotten by. First of all, he was in charge of Afghanistan. It was totally disastrously mishandled. Second, he said publicly, he thought the Russians would be in Kyiv in 3 days. They're still not in Kyiv. He paid no consequences. And third, as you point out, I don't understand, under our Constitution and under the rule of law, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs can, without the president's permission, talk to the head of the Chinese military and reassure them as though he was on China's side against the president of the United States. I mean, I'm an Army brat. My dad's
listen, part of Trump's negotiation is that you don't know where he's coming from. You think he's an unknown entity. There's not a playbook. Milley literally took that off the table. Part of it is like, well, we just don't know what Trump's going to do because he's unpredictable. Unlike, everyone else who, they have a playbook. I'm sure the Chinese have stolen it and probably know it, back and front. Trump was different. He kept people on their toes. It's why you didn't have Russia invading their allies under Trump. It's why China wasn't playing those games. It's why North Korea stopped launching missiles across Japan. That seems like a no-brainer, and yet he did it. And there's no consequence. There's no penalty. I mean, I would imagine if someone did that under a Trump administration who was a conservative general and did something, the opposite, they'd be court-martialed in about 2 seconds and they'd be out on their ass.
That's right. And I think if people will just think through the concept that you have the senior general in the American military take it on his shoulders to circumvent the constitutional commander-in-chief. And remember, the founding fathers who wrote the Constitution under the leadership of George Washington, who had been a commander-in-chief, when they put in commander-in-chief, they meant it. Yeah. And to have Milley violate the line of authority is, I think, extraordinary. I don't know of any parallel to it.
Well, the same people who don't know what a woman is don't understand the meaning of commander-in-chief. So that's a problem. So maybe to fix those problems, Newt, what do you think the minute number one priorities? Noon, 12:01, January 20th, 2025. What are the minute one priorities? And then what do you think are the first 100-day priorities for the second Trump administration?
That's a big jump. Look, the number one priority.
We got like 4 hours, Newt. Have at it. Yeah.
The number one priority, the very first day, is close the border. Period. Yep. Issue the orders immediately. Have it happening by 5 o'clock that afternoon, and immediately people will be responsive and say, he's keeping his word. We're getting things done. Second, I think they have to have, and I worry about this candidly. They have to have a strategic communications plan which recruits the American people and gets the American people engaged. For example, if virtually every American sometime in the next 6 to 9 months sends in an idea to Vivek and to Elon and says, here's a way we can fix this. Yeah. And I hope they'll submit a whole series of rolling reports as rapidly as they can and not wait around to write some big report that nobody will read. I think then you begin to get a momentum. And then third, you've got to, I cannot overstate this, you have got to get the tax bill done. Yeah. But the other thing, and I'm not a lawyer, so I've been asking some people to study this. I believe that the Supreme Court decision about bureaucracy probably means that the president could issue an executive order the first day that says none of the following regulations will be considered binding because all of them are in violation of the Supreme Court.
I love that.
And I think that could be the largest single deregulatory step ever taken in American history. Now, again, we have people studying it, but I have a hunch that that's technically correct. So I would want him to be decisive, clear, direct. And then, frankly, I have enormous faith in your father. I think he does have a strategy for Ukraine. Yeah. And I would like, I hope that he will execute that as early as he can. He'll save a lot of lives. And in the long run, make a big step towards a safer and more peaceful world.
Listen, I think that's right. I think another step that sort of be interesting. I know I literally saw something, again, I don't know if it's accurate, but it seemed accurate. Like, there was a receipt, an expenditure that had to be a thing where the DOD bought an industrialized size shredder so they could shred whatever documents are out there. So I'd like to create an incentive system for the door kickers in the military, the guys that are doing the work that have been exposed to this nonsense, to be whistleblowers against the nonsense that was going on in the higher ups, so that we can actually, again, expose that to the American public so they can see what's actually been going on, because I think that'd be another important one for everyone to see. We want to just have the utmost transparency.
Yeah, and I think it's very important, the principle that you have to educate and inform the American people, at which point they will render judgment. There's a great line by Joseph Paterno, who was a Democratic politician many, many years ago, wrote a book called The Election Game and How to Win It. And I'm sorry, Joseph Napolitan. And he said, never underestimate the intelligence of the American people, I agree, nor overestimate the amount of information they have. And his point was, you give them the information, they'll talk to each other, they'll reach very solid decisions, but they're not necessarily going to go out on their own. So I think a very big part of this administration for the first 6 months has to be making sure that the average American gets to realize how really, really bad it's been and how really much has to change. And if that happens, then we'll be riding a wave of public outrage and public indignation. And at that point, we'll be in a position, I think, to win huge victories in the Senate and the House. And we'll have a bunch of Democrats vote with us.
I think that's right. So more broadly, Newt, I've been talking a lot about this sort of the MAGA cultural movement. Reagan once joked, you can tell a lot about a man's character by the way he eats jelly beans. I sort of feel the same way with my father and McDonald's. I was the guy that sort of called him, the blue collar billionaire, and people are like, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. I was like, no, he gets it. He understands real people because, while he may be a bit of a showman here and a little glitzy here, when he's at home, his happy place is sort of, eating a burger and watching a ball game. Can you talk a little bit about that cultural shift in the Republican Party and how we can carry out this MAGA mission?
Look, part of the reason you ended up with some never Trumpers was they joined the Republican Party to get away from all that.
Yeah.
They wanted to go to fancy 5-star restaurants and they wanted to be surrounded by people who were nice. And they thought all those people who were serving them had to be Democrats because they didn't want to get associated with them. And I've known your dad long enough to know that, in fact, and I always tell people, you tell me if you think this is right. I always tell people one of the real keys is that he was a construction real estate guy more than a finance real estate guy.
Yep.
And he's out there actually building things, talking to blue collar workers for his entire career.
I say it all the time. That's how he was better because he listened to the guys on the job site. He spent time with them. He valued their opinion, perhaps in many cases, much more so than some executive, in an office behind an Excel spreadsheet. So, that's how he knew how to communicate with those guys. That's how he was like them because he actually, he made a lot of money listening to them, taking their advice. And so he trusts their advice as much as the quote unquote experts who, frankly, haven't exactly been expert in getting things right over the last few decades.
I think that's right. So I think part of, and I've always felt this about him, I used to tell reporters when they were first trying to come to grips with him, that if The Apprentice had been on PBS immediately after Downton Abbey, they would have understood Trump. But because The Apprentice was on a commercial station, not a single political reporter in Washington had ever watched it. So they had no idea that in 14 years, he had mastered television at a level unlike anybody else. I mean, he understood television as well or better than Reagan understood movies. Yeah. And nobody understood that. Well, he hasn't lost any of that touch, which I think is really interesting, that he spent the years in the White House. He spent the years having people try to destroy him. And yet, when I've been with him and I've watched him, his natural interaction with people, his natural curiosity. There's this great series that Oprah did years ago where your dad agreed to do all the different jobs at his hotel in Chicago. And so he's dressed like a bellman, and he's dressed like a waiter, and he's doing all this stuff. And you can tell he's having a ball. I mean, he thinks it's fun to be out here doing different things. You got the same thing out of the garbage truck. I mean, I think deep down he thought this was a kick and a lot better than normal campaigning. And of course, coming in wearing the vest. And, he managed to take that vest and turn it into a 20-minute riff. Yeah. I don't know that there's another politician in America who could have done it.
Yeah, he talks with the American people, not at them. And that seems to be a big difference between him and so many of the other people out there. So, Mr. Speaker, Newt Gingrich, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, guys. When Newt talks, listen, because this is a man who's done it all and gets it. So we really appreciate you always being there, Newt. Thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to seeing you in person again soon.
Take care.
Be well.
Thank you for listening. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcasts and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.